So the lady, all right. So taking it from the top, a very good evening, everybody. And thank you for making time to come to the feedback session. A big thank you to Prof. Karel Stans, Dr. Wayne Koch, and Prof. Lene Grapner, who went to the session to represent SIOPSA. And I know some of the colleagues on the call were also there. And I think it's important for us to just have an opportunity to give feedback. What did we hear? What came out of the session? And what are our thoughts going forward? So I'm going to hand over to Dr. Wayne Koch, and then Prof. Karel and Prof. Lene can also jump in and give feedback on what they heard in the session. So over to you, Ruwain. And colleagues, you can pop questions in the chat as we go along, and then we'll address it after the inputs have been shared.
Thank you, Sharon. Karel, Lene, perhaps what I would do is start off with what was given as the strategic context to, or rationale to the new proposed framework. And then perhaps we could add in terms of just some of the conversation that resulted. Is that okay with you both? And so the way this was framed in terms of the meeting was held on the 13th of June. And the invitation was for providers of internship programs in the psychology field and abroad, which is counseling, clinical, neuroscience, industrial and organizational psychology, research psychology, the whole spectrum. And so the meeting was hosted by the professional board. And in the meeting started off, of course, with just an introduction, and the rationale for the proposed change was then provided to us, and then there was a conversation which we'll go into now. So partly the conversation started with the rationale, which is based on the need for mental health in South Africa, and particularly those that are the position as part of the World Health Organization's motto around no health without mental health, and how do we provide access to mental health within the South African context as psychologists. The conversation was also then positioned as South Africa being the most unequal society in the world, and we need resources to meet the mental health needs of our society. There was also conversation about the NHI and how the NHI would provide access to health to not only a privileged few, but the majority of South Africans as well. And we know that was passed recently, and so there's lots of conversation happening around the NHI. And so the conversation was then also by the board in terms of the rationale was about the great treatment gap, and how do we then, as psychologists, how do we produce more psychologists that can deal with the treatment gap that we find ourselves in our current context. Now, when we spoke last time, we talked about the options that they provided. Now, what the board had done, from what our understanding was, they had a group of people that got together. They had a number of options that they put, which is mainly the professional board. They had not consulted with any of the different categories. And they presented these two options as a basis for conversation. This roadshow was one of many that they still need to have. They will, of course, have conversations with the associations like Hpcsa and SIOPSA, and with members as they go along. And so that was just the context that they set in terms of why this was important, in terms of the gap that we have in South Africa, and of course training more psychologists to be able to deal with the treatment gap that we have within our South African health context. I think, Karel, I'll stop there. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the conversation about the options and what were some of the and Lene, perhaps what was some of the feedback that the different members presented at the meeting. So I'll hand over to Karel and Lene, and I'll chip in as well in terms of just some of the things that I heard.
Thank you, Ruwaina. I think you summarized what I call the Anne Watts approach very clearly, because Dr. Anne Watts presented this scenario and why it was important. What I did, because the chair of the board presented, and they were waiting for Prof Naidu to come back from what they said the D8 meeting, so we're not sure what happened in the D8. But when Justin completed, I asked a procedural question just to make sure that we are taking serious in the meeting. And my approach was to ask that they clarify the status of the meeting, and that they also clarify that there will be minutes, and the minutes will be made available to us, of which they did confirm it will happen. So, and the status was to consult with us, and not only to take down our names and put it on a list to say that they've consulted. So we did not, as far as I know, Lenae, Ruwaina, receive any minutes back. I do think they are serious in terms of my experience to provide the minutes. So it's interesting to see and how they captured it. Nevertheless, I think what they've tried then is to explain the first pathway, which led to quite a few questions, and they divided the room into sort of four blocks to ask or allow participants to ask questions regarding specifically pathway 1. I think the responses from the floor was, and Lenae can go into much more detail, and if you want to, in terms of the responses from other institutions, because it was not only the SIOPSA and the universities present, it was also the internship sites that was well presented. So I think there was quite a lot of questions regarding the pathway, and therefore most of the time of the meeting was spent on pathway 1 up until after tea time, which I think elicit quite a lot of concerns in a certain sense. And the Health Professions Council's members then tried to respond to those and to clarify. I specifically had to assist the chair in clarifying the difference between a professional degree and an academic degree, as we clarified it in this meeting 2 weeks ago. And I think that assisted a few members in the meeting. Lenae, I'm not sure if there's, let's stay to pathway 1 maybe before we go to pathway 2, because pathway 2, they didn't go into too much detail. They then decide to ask for options. So I'm not sure if you want to add some comments from the floor regarding option or pathway 1.
I can basically just echo what Ruwaina and Carl said. So the pathways, and specifically like Carl says, a lot of time was spent on pathway 1, but the whole approach for me was very much different from the Roadshow in Cape Town and I believe in Natal, in that they framed it against the backdrop of the mental health need in South Africa, and also the National Health Insurance Bill, and that us as psychologists have to position ourselves to address the mental health needs. And so from there, like Carl says, a lot of responses came and a lot of opposition against the pathway 1. So just to mention a few, they mentioned the registration process is going to take much longer. Questions were asked about what's going to happen with the registered psychometrists currently. And a question was asked, which I thought was quite relevant. Why would anyone think of studying beyond a general psychologist position then? And then the main concerns against the jeopardizing of the independent practice registration. And like Carl said, we had tea then, and then we ventured on to pathway 2. But I think at this stage it was quite clear that the Hpcsa wanted more suggestions, and the rest of the time was kind of used then to hear from the floor, which I appreciated because a lot of good suggestions was made. I just want to say this. I got the sense that we are looking at a time frame, to give you an idea, of around 8 to 10 years. I don't think this is going to happen overnight. It's definitely not going to be 2 to 3 or 4, even 5-year framework. If you look at the process that universities have to follow to register and develop these degrees and the pathways that they suggest. So what they're going to do, they're going to go back and consolidate the suggestions, then come back to us. Then we have to think about what the degrees are going to look like. So yeah, I just want to put that out there. And then also just personally, I have more peace of mind. I don't think we have all the answers, but for me, this is going to take much more thought than I think initially was the idea. And the Hpcsa Board of Psychology is open for that. That was my feeling. Let me stop there.
Yeah, so maybe if I can add, Lene, so one of the questions that I've put to the board is, if you want to develop a training program, it's essential that you start with a job description and a job analysis for what they called generalist psychologists, taking the psychometrist and the counselor away and putting the generalist psychologist in place. And I think they try to defend that there's no such description or gazetted scope of practice in place yet. But it was clear that, my perspective, that that made them really think that how can you design a pathway, an academic pathway, if you don't really know what a general psychologist is going to do. So, and I think that went through to the last person that really made it. I think Prof. Sumaya Leifer from WITS that made a nice contribution at the end in terms of things they need to look at. But what I think is also important is that the resistance from the floor regarding the generalist psychologist was, for example, the practitioners, the clinical practitioners that said, so where's the money going to come from? How many jobs will be created for a generalist psychologist within the national health insurance if it's so important? And I think we also need to think about it, because if students come to our universities, as I also remarked as one of the suggestions, that if parents come to our department during our open day and speak about career possibilities for their children, they specifically ask, so what job will this degree lead to? Will they get employed? How much is the degree going to cost before they invest in it? Else they go to accounting or business management or to some of the other degrees where the career possibility, the employability is much higher. So I do think that is something we need to address. But let me stop there, Ruwan. I'm not sure if you want to comment.
Yeah, Carol, just I wanted just to echo what you both have said. This is not a short-term, this is a long-term consultation process. My sense of this meeting, which is, as Lene was saying, was different from the previous meeting in that they recognized that they would have to consult with the different categories for them to come up with a solution. I think one of the things just to remind everyone is that industrial organizational psychology was positioned as part of research psychology as an academic qualification. When we asked the question, what was the thinking around that, it was clear that there was not sufficient thinking around why that is part of academic qualification, and that they were open to revising it as a different way of positioning it. So none of this is cast in stone, and that I think what is important as well, and I think is a good thing I would suggest, is the ability to go from psychology, from IOP psychology into general psychology, the ability to move into general psychology. If you want to become a clinical psychologist, there is a pathway which is currently not possible. Again, it's probably your children that will benefit from this, not us. Everything will stay the same for you as psychologists. Nothing will change. I think an important point that was made here, Carol and Lene, is that it's almost a downgrade of the profession, in that they would define a general psychologist without a master's. And the suggestion is perhaps you call it there's something else, not to downgrade the profession compared to international standard, which is a master's or PhD to be a psychologist. And so they were open to kind of looking at calling it different things. But after 4 years, what will happen is that these individuals will be able to go into hospitals, into workplaces, and able to do counseling and psychometric assessments. And perhaps they will be called something different, but calling them general psychologists would actually downgrade, I would suggest, the profession. And I think they were open to that as a suggestion, and which was really, really good to hear.
Thanks, Rowan. Lene, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just want to add, before I forgot, I raised my hand to what Rowan just said. There was a huge response from the floor, in the sense that we do have a vast amount of counselors, registered counselors, that as we speak can be released into the field to address the mental health need that the board said there is. And why then are they considering closing this category? And then all the relevant decisions, all the decisions that they made regarding counselors and how they can function, which I personally felt was very relevant, because as we speak, there are hundreds sitting at home who cannot be appointed anywhere else. And that links to what Carol said regarding the job description of the general psychologist, which should be sorted out first, because can the counsellor not then suitably fit in that role? I think that's about the crux of it.
Thank you so much. I think for me, just hearing the feedback, it's quite encouraging. Carol, before I open it up to the floor.
Yeah, so maybe Sharon, one thing and one of the suggestions that didn't came out is because the drive, it seems, if I call it the and what dilemma, is that why not create a category then for community counsellors? Because if it's going to be aligned with a national health insurance where industrial psychologists won't necessarily play an important role, why then alongside the counsellors create a community counselling category, which will be post a 4-year B-Psych degree and a sort of a internship similar to what we do for the psychometrists and the counsellors. And then I really think they can open up the floor without jumping into some of the suggestions. And I think we must address some of the suggestions later on. But I really think there's an opportunity, and I really hope that they will allow Ruwain to join the foreseen task team to really that we can make an impact on that level. I do think the concerns from the clinical and the counselling psychologists was also significant, because they felt that the medical schemes will already downgrade the fees that they claim for services currently under the Medical Schemes Act will be downgraded to a generalist psychologist, which will be then on honours level instead of the current registered practitioners on master's level. So that was a concern. Two of the ladies that was sitting there, I can't remember they came from a practice, and they also look at internships. I'm not sure if the two of you can remember who the lady was, but that was real concerns, and I think the board really took that to heart when they made a suggestion or a response to that. Sharon?
Thanks, Carol. So I think at a very practical level, that was going to be my next question of how do we take it forward? And I think Rowan and I are aligned in that SIOPSA can still continue to play an advocacy role. And I think we can motivate quite strongly to be part of that task team, because from a community point of view, we do need to have a seat at the table. SIOPSA also has the HOD forum, and we need to have a collective way of gathering inputs, because I mean, it's so practical. Like, what about our fees? How do they get impacted? What does that mean if you're saying we want, to solve this need of our community not having enough mental health practitioners? Is this the only way? And as people just gather and pull together ideas, I think SIOPSA can play that significant role in just directing the input. So colleagues, I'm just inviting you rather to comments, questions, any points of clarity that you have. Yes,
I think,
Louis.
Sharon, I think it's important from the community, because a lot of them also attended, and they might have heard things from the floor differently than the three of us that was focused from a SIOPSA perspective. So if there's maybe a suggestion, if there's someone specifically in the audience that also attended and observed feedback, that they also prepared to share it with us, please.
Yes, Carl, that's a good idea.
Can I perhaps jump in quickly? It's Steve Renikel here.
Hi, Steve.
Yes, Steve.
Hi. Sorry, Sharon. I just want to forgive me, but out of a place of ignorance, I wonder if you guys could just backtrack for 2 minutes and give. I don't know. I'm sure there are at least one or two other people who are a bit lost. Give us a context of this whole thing. When you talk about pathways, I wasn't involved in a previous meeting, so is this a framework? I'm learning as you're going along. It's making more and more sense. But maybe just a little bit of background, 2 minutes. I know I don't want to waste people's time when other people actually know about this, but if you could.
Okay. Carol, do you want to jump in? Before you jump in, Carol, so there's also a video that is on our social media platform of our initial conversation. So it will take you through the discussion that we went through on the pathways and why we decided to have a collective voice to go to the Health Professions Council. Carol, just the high level.
So Steve, basically they've presented, and Lene, Ruane, I don't have the slides with me. It might be good if we put pathway 1 and pathway 2 on the screen quickly, just for the bigger audience to look at before we go into detail. I'm not sure if one of you have it close. I'm at the wrong computer now.
But
and the pathways have been posted.
If you could go back before the pathways, pathways to what and why and by who?
Yeah. So if you see the pathways, you will understand, I think, okay. Steve.
Okay. I'm already understanding more. Okay.
Yeah. So they've basically, well, it originated, if I can say, with the internships that they wanted to integrate, what they call the reintegration of internships into the master's programs, so that the universities are responsible for it. And then suddenly the roadshows came up, and the issue is not necessarily, I'm a little bit worried because we didn't address that issue as part of this pathway presentations, really, although they did allow us some discussion. But Steve, basically in pathway 1 there's a professional pathway. You need to see, and I clarified this with them because they didn't really understand. The professional pathway refers to a professional degree, your first degree as a professional degree. So it's a 4-year degree. So it's typical, all the professions have a bachelor's of engineering, or a bachelor's of law, or a bachelor's of clinical psychology, or a bachelor's of psychology, as they indicated here, although no universities really went that route. Bachelor's of education, a bachelor's of social work. And then what they sort of created a lot of misunderstanding, is putting us in an academic, so it didn't sound like we were doing an academic pathway, but it refers to your first degree. So if your first degree is it's a bachelor's degree, it's actually a general because there's a lot of debate around it. But at the meeting, I clarified it to the audience as a bachelor's degree. It's a 3-year degree. And then you do a honors, which sort of gives you the equivalence of a professional degree. So this is pathway 1. So they called as the academic, which is wrong. It's academic up until honors, and then you become professional because you do the professional degrees that are registered. So their drawing is a little bit skewed here. Maybe if you move to the second one, and then I had a few questions there, but let me explain the professional pathway. Pathway number 2. So what they did here is they took the professional academic out, and they call it higher education qualification sub-framework, which is not really right, because your first degree still stays a professional degree, and your first degree for industrial psychology and research psychologists also stay a bachelor's degree plus honors before you go to the accredited degrees. So these are the two pathways, and you will see here, Ruwain, if you can maybe highlight the categories here. Just psychological counselor, combination of counselors and psychometrists training, that one. So that's where a lot of questions came about. So if you go to the pathway number 1, they call that the generalist psychologist. Can you see there the generalist psychologist in the green? And that's where we got stuck, because nobody really know. And I asked the question, so what does a general psychologist look like before you do the professional training? So I'm not sure, Steve, if that helps, and some of the people in the audience.
Carol, thanks a lot. That clears my confusion up. Thank you.
I think, Carol, to add to that, what they have acknowledged is that, once we have, as a community, agreed on what the framework looks like, that they would have to and engage with higher education, engage with the Department of Health. So there's a lot of work that still needs to go into this. But I think what is more important, I think that the message that came across is that we should be, this should be not a top-down approach, but it should be an approach where a bottom-up, where we're involved in the conversation up front, and it's not just presented with options. I think what is positive is that they wanted to start the conversation. This is a legacy issue from the previous board, apparently, and they wanted to start the conversation, which they've started now. So my sense to everyone is that don't be too concerned at this point in time. What is important that we get involved and that we have an input. And as we engage with the health professions, with the professional board, we will also engage with you to get input as well. So that's just to put everyone at ease. And I think before, lack of communication, lack of change management, we were all kind of making assumptions about what will happen. And I think we've got more information now. And it seems like the board has changed its attitude in terms of wanting to engage the community around understanding how do we transform the psychology profession, because that's really at the heart of this. What exists perhaps now may not exist in 5 to 10 years' time. And I think one of the comments that one of the heads of department from WITS was saying was that perhaps what we should look at is designing it closer to what exists, to make sure that the transition to the new is not that difficult. And so that was just a comment that came from one of the other academic institutions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ruwain. Louise, your hand has been up. You want to jump in?
Hi, Sharon. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I just maybe wanted to echo some of the sentiments that I've heard, because I was there, and it was just interesting. Also, I want to say, to observe how many industrial psychologists did come through for that meeting, that engagement. I think that was quite impactful as they moved across the different areas, to hear the different industrial psychologists' views on how this impacts their practice. I think the move from academic to professional career or academic pathway was significant, because it has a real impact from a psycholegal perspective as to what you can and can't do in court, and how that will perceive, and that would definitely impact the IOP community quite significantly. I think that was certainly brought forward. But what I think was really nice, and then I may be sharing the nicety attached to it, a nice reflection is once again hearing from different psychologists in our space, in our category, let's say, putting forward ideas around how to engage, how to move it forward, how to apply our practice possibly when designing the future jobs that Ryan was talking about now, which was Prof. Lesiba's discussion as well. How do we take the paradigm of African psychology and make psychologists ready for Africa, or the world in which we live in? And I think that was quite significant. I'm just sharing some thoughts and ideas that came out that I think may color in some of what everybody is talking, color in what everybody's talking about. And then there was also a discussion put forward around by some of our colleagues saying, they already do community work as part of their practice. So they viewed their way in, or actually said, the community psychology maybe that Prof. Stans is talking about, there's actually a role in their eyes for IOPs to also play. So it was, it was a very lively session. I would certainly recommend it in the future for more IOPs to attend if that invitation gets extended to the broader community. And I think we should support our SIOPSA to move forward and really kind of move into that task team. But yeah, that's just my reflection.
Thanks,
Sharon,
thanks very much, Louise.
Can I ask Thandiwe, who was also present at the meeting, to perhaps also give a perspective? She's made a comment on the chat. Thandiwe, you want to maybe just share your views as well based on your engagement at the workshop, at the roadshow?
Hi, good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone. I think what is encouraging is that, judging from the feedback that's coming out today, is that at least after that workshop, there has been some further considerations. I'm not so sure in terms of what exactly does it mean where the word academic in the pathway 2 has been replaced with, I think, the HP, however way it means. But I think that's also encouraging, because at least that tells us that there has been some further consideration in terms of not looking at IOP as purely falling under academics and research. So that's point number one. Number two, I know in that meeting, I think there was a question, and I think I was one of those that supported the idea that the workplace learning, even though I think when it was presented then, it wasn't meant as workplace learning as it would suitably for IOPs, as in being exposed to the workplace at an earlier stage of your career. But then upon questioning, I know I raised a comment to say, yes, it may not have been intended as such, but can we then maybe looking forward, look at that aspect of exposing IOPs in their training to the workplace at an earlier stage, as to whether it will fall at an honors level or just before honors, however, but at least such that at least there's a bit of some exposure for IOPs with the workplace or at the workplace much earlier than the stage where you have to do your internship. I think that's the comment that we raised, and I particularly supported that comment. So I just wanted to get a sense to say, was that considered any further? Has there been any deliberations in that sense? If not, will it still be something that's probably on the plate for considerations as we are building this new framework? Thank you.
Sharon, maybe if I can answer, because the whole workplace learning concept comes from the professional degrees, where it's part of the degree. For example, and I spoke last time about the B.Ed, the education degree. So you do your 3-year academic degree, and then you go to the teacher or the school, and you teach for 1 year as part of your training. The engineers go to a company. So we don't really do that in the industrial psychology perspective, because and I must say there's creative ways to make sure that our IOPs in their third year and after their honours are employable. So, for example, and I know Lene can also testify to that. Currently, if I look at the honours students, all our honours students are employed to the extent that we lecture from 6 to 9 in the evenings. And it seems that we're going to do lectures next year, Fridays and Saturdays, to accommodate the working students. So the work integration is always a challenge because you get paid by government for the curriculum that you present. And it's difficult to integrate those and to make it work without extending the 3-year degree to a 4-year degree. And government still pay, because then the degree becomes much costlier. So there is universities, and I can guarantee you and ensure you that part of parcel of every accreditation, let's say the South African Board of People Practice or international accreditations, this is one of the burning points, because South Africa is totally different than other countries when we get into the space of 3-year degrees and specializing very early. So and we are very creative in inviting guest lecturers, speaking to the students, getting them some sort of a practical qualification so that they're employable, because it's about work integrated learning, and workplace learning is about employability. And some university students are more employable than others because of our nature and our proximity to where we are. So it is not a question that we're going to answer here as a SIOPSA, although the way that we approach it, SIOPSA, and making the conference practical and for students to attend and allow them to contribute at the conferences is all small contributions to this workplace learning and making them accustomed to the profession and building the profession. And therefore, I termed the name emerging psychologist many years back to assist in this process. Then I'm not sure, you also do a lot of work as Northwest University on work integrated learning and workplace learning, and before you go to a learnership and an internship, which is on a different level.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol. Are there other comments or questions, maybe something that you've heard and you are curious? Yes, Sylvia.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks, colleague. This is an encouraging feedback that we are receiving today. And I think for us, the biggest thing is that at least the Hpcsa is open, for us to discuss and to engage. The model that they explained at the beginning, it makes sense, but also I think as IOPs, we need to remain in that professional category, because the minute you start breaking, moving one to another, then it starts becoming a challenge, especially for the practitioners who are already practicing now. So I'm really excited that we have a space as SIOPSA to continue engaging with the Hpcsa so that we can get more inputs, and whatever the products they come up with, even if it's going to be in the long term, we are part of the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. So yeah, it is quite encouraging, because what I'm hearing is this is not a thing that's going to happen next year. We need to just breathe. We've got time, a little bit of time, but that doesn't mean we need to opt out of the conversation. How can we carry on holding the council to account? So we need to get the minutes, first of all, from the roadshow. We also need to make sure we get a spot at the table in terms of the task team. So those are the two actions that I'm hearing. Colleagues, you can also be thinking while we get more inputs. Melissa, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. And thank you for the feedback from the panel. I wasn't at the meeting, but thank you for the thorough feedback. I just want to add on, and I think what Lene said that came up in that meeting around the councillors, and we have so many councillors already out there, how do we utilize them? And I just want to, and I said it in the previous meeting as well, in terms of the psychometrists, we have hundreds of psychometrists out there that add value. If we talk about mental health, just an example, if we think about the psychometrist's role, perhaps in, say, for instance, looking at, advising on subjects for grade 10 learners, advising for grade 12 learners what career path they should take. All of those things add up to the mental health of that child or that learner. If they have security in what they are studying, they're not blind going into a career, they don't know where they're going. All of those things add also up to the mental health. And I don't have to point out all the problems that we have with our education system. In the last 2 weeks, we saw about the literacy levels, etc., etc. So I think the psychometrist in that role can make a huge contribution in terms of the mental health of learners and young children. Because sometimes you might find that you give feedback, say for instance, for a child that wants to know what subjects he or she must take. And in that conversation of feedback, other things comes up, problems at home, etc. And then obviously the psychometrists are trained to say, there's a problem here, we can refer this child and the parent to somebody that can assist with those problems. So they have also a platform where they can vent and also, bring up their, personal problems as well. And also, as part of our curriculum for the honors students, they do psychological well-being, organizational well-being. This is part of their training in terms of their curriculum. So they're also much aware of these things going on in the community or in the organization that they work for. So they have a huge contribution to make towards psychological well-being and mental well-being as well. So that's just my short comment.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I think it's practical examples of what do we already have? How do we capitalize on the skills that are there without reinventing the wheel? So thanks for that. Any other thoughts or comments? We have a few minutes left before we jump off the call. Yes, Sylvia.
Yeah, Sharon, in terms of the timelines, the first time they were indicating that there's another session that's happening in August. So from the people who attended, do they have an idea of when this process will be done? Because from our side, I think with the ideas that people are raising now within SIOPSA, we can start, documenting our thoughts so that we don't wait for them for after August. So we can already, with all the information that's already there, start documenting. And then maybe even have a task team that can look into this moving forward. So that at least we don't wait for them. We're already working on this on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Great idea, Sylvia. And I think this is a big spot for professional practice within SIOPSA to guide us, and we already have the infrastructure, so the conversation needs to move forward. Ruwen?
Yeah, just a funny comment that was that was made by the board. So we said to them, look, invite us so that we can be part of the next conversation. And the response is, it seems like you don't need to be invited, you come anyway. So as said earlier, we were well represented. Tandiwe, we have not had any further feedback. I think, Sylvia, your idea is a brilliant one. Let's be proactive and think about what could that look like as a model. Of course, having the various practitioners and academic colleagues together. And I think it would be great if we could proactively think about that and go prepared into that conversation with a perspective or a point of view.
So thanks for that. So colleagues, let us be encouraged. We don't wait for an invitation. By force and by fire, we are there. Inside, we're like, listen, we are part of this profession and we do have a say in terms of how things will move forward. Other thoughts from the panel before we wrap up?
Sharon, if I can put a wish list on the table, I think we because the next session, because there's 2 sessions left, Ruwain, one is to the Free State, and then we're going to call all the societies together, which are there's SIOPSA and SIOPSA, and that's about it. Call them together, and I think we need to be ready to make a good proposal from SIOPSA's perspective, and we have all the people behind SIOPSA to do that. I really think if the need is what I call the Anne Watts dilemma, that we need to get community councillors on the ground, then we as SIOPSA, with our strong organizational capability, need to show them how it can be done, and put a community call together. I typically think from an academic perspective, if I have a job description on what a community psychologist will do, there's enough, I guarantee you, there's enough people in South Africa that has at least a 3-year psychology degree, so that we can do a postgraduate diploma in community psychology, determine the entry requirements, which is a degree from some other universities, that we get money from the Health Professions Council, that the people that will complete this degree, at least 70% of them will be immediately employed directly after we as universities complete that qualification. I think that will be really a change champion that we can change and start changing, because as soon as we have something like that is workable, and parents can see that their children is employed, people in the workplace can see it's worth studying that, and it will bring in some money to make a living from, then it will be a worthwhile exercise. And I really think we have enough people around the table that can tell them how it should be done and what such a postgraduate diploma should look like.
Thank you very much, Carol. I like this community, because people are not just sitting. People are saying, I can do this, because the wisdom is already here. So how do we co-create, all these different thoughts? So I've put in the chat the email address for president@SIOPSA. So whoever is president at that time will be able to co-create. Ren is like, oh, I've got another month. Yes. So whoever is president at that time, please just put your hand up to say, I have an idea. This is an area I was working in. This is research I've been doing. This is what I've noted where I am. And I think we can contribute as IOPs towards this conversation on the frameworks. So don't shy away. Be big, be audacious. Let's really try and reimagine what IOP can be and to meet the needs of the world of work. Ruwain, Lene, any last thoughts from you?
So perhaps a thought to build on what Carol said earlier. I think what we propose to the board is that we can play both a content and a process role. And I think what Carol was raising in terms of process is thinking about this from a work psychology. And I think Tandiwe made it very clear in the meeting that we are work psychologists, right? And so as work psychologists, we can help you to think about the kind of professions that you want to create and the process of how you go about doing it. So we have a role to play there. And as the invitation went out, if you're playing in this field, if you're an expert in this field, please volunteer and help us with that. But there's also a content part where we can contribute. And, particularly the work that's being done by Sylvia and Lene around work counseling, playing a role in terms of the mental health within the work context. And there's other aspects as well. If we use the mental health as a way of thinking about this and our contributions, I think Melissa made a similar contribution around how we contribute to the well-being in organizations. So there's lots of content that we can provide. And so please ask us then to put your hand up as well and help us with crafting what that could look like in terms of the suggestions around educating and transforming the profession to be even better than what it is.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Lene, your thoughts?
Yes, no, I can absolutely just support Ruwain and Carol in your thoughts. And for me, one major positive was this started off as a major threat. I think the way that it was communicated initially by the board and the way it's communicated now changed drastically due to the fact that we came together and, as a unified approach. And I also experienced that there at the Roadshow in Johannesburg. And I especially appreciated the way, Ruane, that SIOPSA was there. And just by stating facts, just by clarifying what IOP stands for and how we can contribute and offering to assist, because I think that is also one important aspect for us, is to address the mental health needs from a work psychology approach. And so that was a major positive for me. So like I said, I feel majorly more at peace, but I think the work is starting now. And like you invited everyone, Ruane, to really just come with ideas and take part and be part of the task team. Sharon, thank you for the initiative.
Awesome. Thank you, Lene. And really, teamwork makes dreams work. So I believe very strongly in the power of collaboration. And with our many heads together, imagine what we can create. So it's quite affirming to hear the board acknowledging that we're not waiting for an invitation, because we kept on saying we need to be sitting there. We need to be part of the conversation. So thank you so much, colleagues. And thank you to our panel for giving us feedback on what came out. Let's keep the conversation going. We will continue to self-organize as SIOPSA. We'll continue to share any documents or any updates that we receive. And yeah, let's keep our profession on the map. We are doing important work. Thank you so much, everybody.